My name is Margaret, I'm 68 years old, and the morning I found my late husband's garage empty, I thought my heart stopped beating. No, scratch that. I wished it had stopped beating. Because what I felt in that moment, standing there staring at that concrete floor where James's 1967 Shelby GT500 should have been, was worse than death. It was betrayal so deep, so crushing, that I wanted to tear my own chest open just to make the pain stop. You see that empty space behind me? That's where 37 years of love used to sit. 37 years of Saturday mornings with my husband's hands covered in grease, his face lit up like a child's as he explained every bolt, every wire, every carefully restored piece of that beautiful machine. That car wasn't just metal and chrome, it was our marriage, our dreams, our promise to each other that we'd cruise Route 66 when he retired. But James never got his retirement. Cancer took him 8 months ago, and I've been drowning in this house ever since, surrounded by his tools, his coffee cup still sitting on the workbench where he left it, his reading glasses folded next to the repair manual he never finished. And now this. Now even his car is gone. I stood there in that garage for what felt like hours, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. The morning sun was streaming through the window, highlighting every oil stain on the concrete where the Shelby used to drip. James always said he'd fix that leak someday. Someday. God, how I hate that word now. Do you know what it feels like to have your heart ripped out twice? First by death, then by the living? Because that's what happened to me. I lost my husband to something we couldn't control, something that fought dirty and took him piece by piece until there was nothing left but memories and that car. That beautiful, perfect car that he poured his soul into for decades. And someone had stolen it from me. I knew exactly who that someone was. My son. My adopted son, Ethan, who I raised from the age of 9 when his birth parents decided drugs were more important than their child. Ethan, who used to sit on my lap while James worked on the engine, asking a million questions about carburetors and transmissions. Ethan, who I loved as fiercely as any mother could love a child, biological or not. I marched into that house with rage burning in my chest like acid. My hands were clenched into fists, and I could feel my wedding ring cutting into my palm. James's ring. The one I'd never taken off, even after they lowered him into the ground. I was shaking so hard I could barely turn the doorknob. Ethan! I screamed as I burst through the kitchen door. Ethan, get down here right now. He came downstairs in his pajamas, that guilty look already spreading across his face like spilled paint. Behind him came Sophie, his wife of 2 years, looking perfectly put together even at 7 in the morning. Her blonde hair was styled, her makeup flawless, wearing one of those expensive robes that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. She had this smug little smile playing at the corners of her mouth, like she was watching a movie she'd already seen. Where is it? I demanded, my voice cracking with fury. Where's your father's car? Ethan couldn't even look at me. This man I'd raised, who I'd stayed up with through fevers and nightmares, who I'd taught to drive in that very car when he turned 16, couldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he stared at his feet like a coward. But Sophie? Sophie stepped forward with that practiced, condescending smile of hers. Oh Margaret, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, we should have called you first. We know how attached you were to that old thing. Attached? Attached? I felt something snap inside my chest, like a rubber band stretched too far. Attached? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. That old thing was my husband's life's work. That car was. Just collecting dust, Sophie interrupted, waving her manicured hand dismissively. Really, Margaret, you should thank us for doing something productive with it. Do you know how much it was worth just sitting there? I looked at my son, waiting for him to say something, anything, to defend me. To explain. To apologize. But he just stood there like a statue, his shoulders hunched, his face pale. Ethan, I said, my voice breaking, please tell me you didn't. He finally looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Shame, yes, but also defiance. Resignation. Like he'd already made peace with breaking my heart. I sold it, Mom, he said quietly. My wife wanted Paris. Get over it. Get over it. Get over it. Those 3 words hit me like a physical blow. I actually staggered backward, my hand reaching for the wall to steady myself. Get over it. Like 37 years of marriage could be dismissed with a shrug. Like my husband's memory was just an inconvenience to be swept aside. You what? I whispered, because I couldn't trust my voice to be any louder. We needed the money for our anniversary trip, Sophie said brightly, like she was discussing the weather. Paris is so expensive this time of year, and Ethan wanted to surprise me with the presidential suite at the George V. Wasn't that sweet of him? I stared at her perfect face, at her designer clothes, at the diamond earrings that probably cost more than most people's cars. This woman who had everything, who lived in luxury while I scraped by on James's pension, had convinced my son to sell the one thing I had left of my husband. How much? I asked, my voice hollow. What? Ethan mumbled. How much did you get for it? I screamed, all my composure finally shattering like glass. Sophie smiled wider. 40,000. Not bad for a car that old, really. The dealer said we were lucky to get that much. $40,000. For a car that was worth at least twice that, maybe 3 times if it went to the right collector. But that wasn't even the point. The point was that no amount of money could replace what they'd stolen from me. No amount of money could bring back those Saturday mornings, those plans we'd made, those dreams we'd shared. I looked at Ethan, this man I'd raised, this person I'd loved unconditionally for 25 years, and I felt something die inside me. Some fundamental trust, some basic faith in human decency, just withered up and blew away like ash. That car, I said slowly, my voice shaking with rage, was not yours to sell. Actually, it was, Sophie interjected smoothly. Ethan is your next of kin, and since there was no specific mention of the car in James's will. Because I was still alive. I screamed. Because we never thought, never imagined, that our own son would steal from us. Now that's hardly fair, Sophie said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that made me want to slap her. We're not thieves, Margaret. We're family. And family helps family. You can't drive that car anyway, when's the last time you even started it? The truth was, I hadn't started it since James died. I couldn't bear to. Every time I looked at it, I heard his voice explaining the engine timing. Every time I smelled the leather seats, I remembered him sitting beside me, his hand on my knee as we drove through the countryside. That car was a shrine, a memorial, a sacred space where my husband's spirit still lived. And they'd sold it for a vacation. Get out, I whispered. What? Ethan said, finally speaking up. Get out. I screamed, pointing toward the door. Both of you. Get out of my house. Mom, please. Don't call me Mom. The words tore out of my throat like broken glass. A son doesn't steal from his mother. A son doesn't sell his father's memory for vacation money. Sophie grabbed Ethan's arm, her mask finally slipping to reveal the cold calculation underneath. Come on, honey. She'll calm down once she realizes we did her a favor. That garage will make a lovely craft room once we get it cleaned out. They left me standing there in my kitchen, shaking with rage and heartbreak. I heard Ethan's car start in the driveway, heard them drive away, and then I was alone. Completely, utterly alone in a way I hadn't felt even when James died. Because when he died, I still had hope. I still had something left of him. I still had love in my life. Now I had nothing. I walked back to that empty garage and sat down on James's old work stool, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that he'd refused to replace for 15 years. I put my head in my hands and cried, really cried, for the first time since the funeral. Not the polite, controlled tears I'd shed at the cemetery, but ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so deep I didn't even know it existed. I cried for James, taken too soon by a disease that showed no mercy. I cried for the road trips we'd never take, the adventures we'd never have. I cried for the son I thought I'd raised, who turned out to be a stranger wearing a familiar face. But mostly, I cried for myself, for the fool I'd been to trust, to love, to believe that family meant something more than dollar signs and convenience. The worst part? The absolute worst part was the silence. That garage had always been full of sound, James humming off-key while he worked, the radio playing classic rock, the clink of tools, the purr of the engine when he'd start her up just to listen to her run. Now there was nothing. Just the echo of my own broken breathing and the drip, drip, drip of that oil stain he'd never gotten around to fixing. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the morning sun to shift across the concrete floor, creating new shadows where the car used to be. Long enough for my tears to dry into salt tracks on my cheeks. Long enough for rage to settle into something deeper, something colder. Betrayal. That's what this was. Pure, simple betrayal by the two people I'd trusted most in the world. Ethan, who I'd clothed and fed and loved through every scraped knee and teenage heartbreak. Sophie, who I'd welcomed into our family, who I'd given my blessing to marry my son, who I'd tried so hard to accept despite the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right about her. God, the signs had been there, hadn't they? The way she always steered conversations toward money. The way she'd compliment my vintage furniture while suggesting I'd be more comfortable in a smaller place. The way she'd look around our house like she was taking inventory, calculating value, planning improvements. You know, Margaret, she'd said just last month, this house is really too big for one person. Have you thought about downsizing? You could get a lovely little condo and have so much less to worry about. I'd thought she was being helpful. Caring. Looking out for my well-being. What a fool I'd been. She wasn't looking out for me, she was looking out for herself. Planning ahead. Making sure there would be plenty left to inherit when I was gone, and that it would be liquid, sellable, convertible to cash for more trips to Paris. The phone rang, jarring me out of my bitter thoughts. I almost didn't answer it. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone, wasn't ready to explain what had happened, wasn't ready to hear sympathy or advice or platitudes about forgiveness and moving on. But something made me pick it up. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the desperate need to hear a human voice that didn't belong to the people who'd just destroyed my world. Hello? Mrs. Lanning? This is Tom Graves from Graves Classic Auto. I nearly dropped the phone. Graves Classic Auto, I knew that name. It was the high-end dealership about an hour outside town, the one that specialized in vintage and classic cars. James had bought parts from them over the years, had talked about taking the Shelby there someday for a professional restoration. Yes? I managed to say, my heart suddenly pounding. Ma'am, I have your husband's car here. The 1967 Shelby GT 500? And there's something he wanted you to see. The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. What do you mean? Your son brought it in this morning, said he needed to sell it quick. But your husband, well, your husband made me promise something a long time ago. Can you come down here? There's something I need to show you. I was already reaching for my car keys with my free hand. I'll be right there. The drive to Graves Classic Auto was a blur of anger, confusion, and something that might have been hope. What could James have possibly arranged? How could he have known? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, and I had to pull over twice to collect myself. The dealership was exactly what I'd expected, rows of gleaming classic cars under bright lights, everything polished to perfection. Mustangs and Corvettes and Camaros lined up like jewels in a display case. And there, in the back corner, sitting under a spotlight like it was on stage, was James's Shelby. Our Shelby. Seeing it there, in that place, surrounded by strangers, made my chest tighten all over again. It looked wrong somehow, out of place, like a family pet that had been abandoned at a shelter. The red paint gleamed under the lights, the chrome bumpers reflected my face as I approached, and for a moment I could almost smell James's aftershave, could almost hear him saying, "She's a beauty, isn't she, Maggie? Mrs. Lanning?" I turned to see a man in his 60s approaching me, grease under his fingernails and genuine kindness in his eyes. He looked like the kind of man James would have liked, honest, straightforward, someone who understood that cars weren't just machines but repositories of dreams and memories. "I'm Tom Graves," he said, extending his hand. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. Your husband was a good man." "You knew James?" "Oh yes. He saved my business about 15 years ago. I was just starting out, struggling to make ends meet, when I got a customer who wanted to sue me over a restoration that went wrong. Your husband was working insurance investigations then, and he could have easily sided with the customer. Would have been the easy thing to do. But he took the time to really look at what happened, and he proved that the damage was from a previous accident, not my work." I remembered that case. James had come home frustrated, talking about how some people were too quick to blame others for their problems. I'd made him pot roast that night, and he'd spent an hour at the dinner table explaining why integrity mattered more than taking the easy way out. "He didn't just save my reputation," Tom continued. "He sent me customers over the years. Good people who needed honest work done. I owe him more than I can ever repay." "That sounds like James," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "When your son brought the car in this morning, I recognized it immediately. Your husband brought it by a few times over the years, always talking about the road trips you two were planning. He was so proud of that car, but more than that, he was proud of sharing it with you." The pain hit me fresh, like a wave breaking over rocks. My son had no right to sell it. Tom's expression darkened. "That's what I was afraid of. Your husband made me promise something, Mrs. Lanning. He said if this car ever came into my shop under suspicious circumstances, I should call you immediately. He said there was something inside you needed to see." "Something inside?" Tom led me to the Shelby and opened the driver's door. The familiar scent of leather and motor oil washed over me, along with something else, James's cologne, still faintly clinging to the seats after all these months. I had to steady myself against the car as another wave of grief crashed over me. "Behind the radio," Tom said, pointing to the dashboard. "Your husband installed a hidden compartment there about 2 years ago. Said it was for important papers." With trembling fingers, I reached behind the radio and felt along the dashboard until I found a small panel that moved when I pressed it. Inside was a manila envelope with my name written in James's careful handwriting, a smaller sealed letter, and a tiny wooden box. I pulled out the items with shaking hands, hardly believing what I was seeing. How had James known? How had he arranged this? And why had he felt the need to hide things from me? "There's a private office in the back," Tom said gently. "Take all the time you need." I followed him to a small office behind the showroom, my arms full of James's secrets. Tom closed the door quietly behind me, leaving me alone with whatever my husband had wanted me to find. I opened the sealed letter first, and James's voice seemed to fill the room as I read his familiar handwriting. "My dearest Maggie. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong, and I'm not there to protect you anymore. I pray you never have to see this letter, but if you do, please know that everything I've done has been to keep you safe. I've been watching Sophie for over a year now, Maggie. I know that probably sounds crazy, but something about her has never sat right with me. The way she asks questions about our finances. The way she looks at our house like she's already redecorating it. The way she talks about planning for the future when she thinks I'm not listening. I had Peter Coleman, you remember Peter from the insurance company, do some digging. Sophie Martin isn't her real name, Maggie. She's actually Sandra Mitchell, and she's done this before. Twice that we can prove, maybe more times than that. She finds older men with property and assets, marries their sons, and then manipulates them into signing things over. Both of her previous husbands' fathers died under mysterious circumstances within 2 years of her marriages. I know this is hard to believe. I know you love Ethan and you want to trust his judgment. But Sophie is dangerous, Maggie. She's already started working on him, filling his head with ideas about how much easier your life would be in a smaller place, how much money you could have if you liquidated your assets. The key in the wooden box opens a safe deposit box at First National, box number 1247. Inside you'll find stock certificates worth approximately $300,000, money I've been quietly setting aside for your security. There are also copies of all the evidence Peter gathered about Sophie's past. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive. I wanted to be sure before I accused her of anything, and then the cancer got worse so fast. But I've arranged things so that if anything happens to me, if she tries to hurt you or steal from you, you'll have what you need to fight back. I love you, Maggie. I've loved you for 37 years, and I'll love you forever. Don't let them take what's ours. Don't let them win. All my love. James. P.S. Tom Graves is a good man. Trust him. The letter fell from my numb fingers as the full magnitude of what James had discovered hit me like a freight train. Sophie wasn't just greedy, she was a predator. A professional con artist who had targeted our family specifically because we had something she wanted. And Ethan, my poor, trusting son, he had no idea he'd married a woman who was planning to destroy everything we'd built. I opened the manila folder with shaking hands and found myself staring at photocopies of marriage certificates, police reports, and newspaper clippings. Sandra Mitchell, age 32, married to Robert Chen in Sacramento. Robert's 78-year-old father, Henry Chen, died of a heart attack 6 months later, leaving his entire estate to Robert. Robert and Sandra divorced 2 years later, with Sandra receiving a substantial settlement. Sandra Mitchell, age 35, married to David Walsh in Phoenix. David's 81-year-old father, Martin Walsh, died in a fall down the stairs 18 months later. David and Sandra divorced 3 years later, again with Sandra receiving a large settlement. And now she was Sophie Martin, age 38, married to my Ethan. With me as the next target. The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was pure, white-hot fury that made my vision blur and my hands shake. This woman, this monster, had wormed her way into our family with the specific intention of destroying us. She'd looked me in the eye at Christmas dinner, smiled at me at Ethan's wedding, hugged me at James's funeral, all while planning my destruction. How long had she been working on Ethan? How many little suggestions had she planted in his head about my impractical attachment to the past? How many times had she pointed out how much money was just sitting there in the form of cars and houses and belongings? And Ethan. God, poor Ethan. He thought he was married to a loving wife who wanted to travel and experience life with him. He had no idea he was just another mark in a long line of victims, no idea that his loving wife was already planning his inheritance. I picked up the wooden box with trembling fingers and found the small key inside, along with a note in James's handwriting, Box 1247, First National Bank. This is your security, Maggie. This is your independence. Don't let anyone take it from you. $300,000. Money that James had somehow managed to save and invest without my knowledge, money that would ensure I never had to depend on anyone ever again. Money that would give me the power to fight back against Sophie's schemes. But the money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that James had seen the threat, had investigated it, had prepared for it. Even while he was dying, even while fighting cancer with every ounce of strength he had, he'd been thinking about me. Protecting me. Making sure I wouldn't be left defenseless against a predator he couldn't live to fight himself. I sat in that office for what felt like hours, reading and rereading the evidence, letting the full scope of Sophie's deception sink in. She hadn't just stolen a car, she'd stolen my son's heart, his trust, his judgment. She'd turned him into an accomplice in my own destruction, and he didn't even know it. The worst part was imagining how she'd done it. The pillow talk where she'd mentioned how worried she was about me living alone in such a big house. The casual comments about how much the Shelby was worth, how silly it was to let it just sit there. The gentle suggestions that maybe Ethan should take a more active role in managing my affairs, since I was getting older and might not be thinking clearly about financial matters. She'd played him like a violin, and he'd danced to her tune without ever realizing the music was leading him straight off a cliff. I thought about all the times I'd seen them together, all the little interactions I'd dismissed or explained away. The way Sophie always seemed to steer conversations toward family history, asking innocent questions about property deeds and insurance policies. The way she'd volunteered to help me organize James's papers after he died, insisting that I shouldn't have to deal with such painful tasks alone. She'd been gathering information, planning her next move, all while playing the role of the concerned daughter-in-law. And I'd been so grateful for her help, so touched by her apparent concern for my well-being. I'd actually thanked her for being so thoughtful, so caring, so willing to take on the burden of dealing with practical matters while I grieved. What a fool I'd been. What a blind, trusting, stupid fool. But James had seen through her. James had known something was wrong, had felt that same nagging unease I'd dismissed as unfair prejudice against my son's new wife. And instead of trusting his instincts, instead of supporting his concerns, I'd actually defended her. Give her a chance, James, I'd said. She's young, she's trying to fit in. Maybe she's just nervous about joining the family. If I could go back, if I could have just one conversation with my husband again, I'd tell him how sorry I was for not listening. How sorry I was for not trusting his judgment. How sorry I was for leaving him to handle this threat alone while he was fighting for his life. But I couldn't go back. All I could do was move forward with the weapons he'd given me. I walked back out to the showroom where Tom was waiting, the evidence clutched in my hands like a lifeline. He took one look at my face and nodded grimly. It's bad, isn't it? Worse than bad, I said, my voice hoarse from crying. Tom, I need your help. My husband trusted you, and I'm going to trust you too. But I need to know, is that car legally sold? Can she take it? Tom shook his head. Your son brought it in this morning, but we haven't completed the paperwork yet. And after what your husband told me about watching out for suspicious circumstances, I was planning to hold off on processing the sale until I could reach you. Relief flooded through me like cool water. So it's still mine? Technically, it never stopped being yours. Your husband's will left everything to you, and a car that's specific, with documented provenance and restoration records, can't be sold without clear title. Your son may be your next of kin, but that doesn't give him the right to dispose of property while you're still alive and competent. What about the money he took? What money? I stared at him in confusion. Sophie said they got $40,000 for it. Tom's expression darkened further. Ma'am, we never gave anyone money for this car. Your son dropped it off this morning and said he'd be back later to finalize the sale. No money has changed hands. The betrayal hit me all over again, somehow even worse than before. Not only had they stolen my car, they'd lied about it. Sophie had stood in my kitchen that morning, looked me in the eye, and told me they'd already spent money that didn't exist. She'd used fictional vacation plans to justify stealing my husband's legacy. Which meant this whole thing wasn't about needing money for Paris. This was about removing my most valuable asset, getting it out of my hands and into a form that could be easily liquidated. This was about eliminating anything that might complicate their plans for my estate. I need to get that car back, I said, surprised by the steal in my own voice. Consider it done, Tom said. But Mrs. Lanning, if what your husband suspected is true, then getting the car back is just the beginning. This woman isn't going to stop with one failed scheme. He was right, of course. Sophie, or Sandra, or whatever her real name was, had invested too much time and effort in this con to give up easily. She'd already moved on to phase 2 of her plan, trying to separate me from my most valuable possessions. The car was just the start. What do I do? I asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the threat I was facing. You fight back, Tom said simply. You use what your husband gave you, and you fight back. But first, you need allies. People who can help you gather more evidence and protect yourself legally. James mentioned someone named Peter Coleman. I know Peter. Good man, used to work insurance fraud with your husband. He's retired now, does private investigation work. Want me to call him? I nodded, feeling like I was finally taking action instead of just reacting to other people's schemes. And Tom? When my son comes back for the car, I'll tell him there's been a problem with the title. That we need additional documentation before we can proceed with the sale. That should buy you some time. As Tom made the call to Peter Coleman, I walked back to the Shelby and ran my hands over its familiar surfaces. James had spent countless hours restoring every inch of this car, bringing it back to life with patience and love and meticulous attention to detail. He'd dreamed of the day we'd drive it across the country together, stopping at little diners and roadside attractions, making memories that would last us through old age. We'd never gotten that chance. Cancer had stolen our golden years, our retirement adventures, our sunset drives through autumn leaves. But this car was still here, still beautiful, still carrying 37 years of shared dreams in its restored perfection. Sophie thought she could reduce it to a dollar figure, thought she could transform love into cash and dreams into vacation money. She thought she could erase James's legacy as easily as she'd erased her own past, moving from victim to victim like a cancer herself. She was wrong. I wasn't the helpless widow she'd counted on. I wasn't the confused old woman who could be easily manipulated and discarded. I was James Lanning's wife, and he'd made sure I had everything I needed to fight back. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time since I'd found that empty garage this morning, I felt something other than pain and rage. I felt hope. And I felt my husband's love, reaching across death itself to protect me one more time. Before I tell you what happened next, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share still feels like a miracle. A miracle of love that transcended death, of justice that refused to be buried, and of a fight that was far from over. Because Sophie Martin, or Sandra Mitchell, or whatever name she's using now, had no idea what she'd unleashed when she decided to target our family. She thought she was dealing with a grieving widow and her malleable son. Instead, she'd picked a fight with a dead man who was still protecting his wife, and a living woman who was about to become her worst nightmare. The next few days passed in a blur of investigation and revelation that made me feel like I was living in someone else's nightmare. Peter Coleman turned out to be exactly the kind of man James would have trusted, methodical, thorough, and utterly relentless when it came to exposing the truth. He arrived at my house the morning after my visit to Tom's dealership, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that made my blood run cold. Your husband was right to be suspicious, Peter said, spreading photographs and documents across my kitchen table. Sandra Mitchell, that's her real name, has been running this con for at least 8 years that we can prove. There may be more victims we haven't found yet. I stared at the photographs of Sophie with different hair, different clothes, different names, but always the same calculating smile. In one, she was blonde and called herself Sarah Matthews, arm in arm with a man who looked disturbingly like Ethan. In another, she was a brunette named Susan Morgan, posing at what looked like a country club with an older gentleman and a younger man who had to be his son. How many? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That we can document? For marriages, for dead fathers-in-law, for substantial inheritances that mysteriously disappeared during messy divorces. The pattern is always the same, she targets men in their 20s and 30s who have aging parents with significant assets. She's particularly drawn to only children or men with small families, fewer people to ask inconvenient questions. And the fathers always die? Peter's expression grew grim. Within 2 years of her marriage, every single time. Heart attacks, falls, sudden illnesses. Nothing that couldn't be explained by age and infirmity, but the timing is suspicious. The implication hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. You think she kills them? I think she creates circumstances that contribute to their deaths. Stress, isolation, medical neglect. She convinces the sons that their fathers are becoming burdens, that it would be kinder to put them in facilities where they'll get better care. She makes sure they're separated from their support systems, their familiar environments, their reasons for living. I thought about all the times Sophie had mentioned how difficult it must be for me to maintain such a large house, how much safer I'd be in a senior living community, how much less stressful my life would be if I didn't have to worry about property maintenance and financial management. She's already started, hasn't she? I said, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. The suggestions about downsizing, the comments about my age, the offers to help with my finances. Your husband's notes indicate she'd been working on that angle for months before he died. The car theft was probably meant to be the first major asset transfer, a test to see how much resistance you'd put up. What about Ethan? I asked, dreading the answer. What happens to the sons after their fathers die? Peter's silence was answer enough, but he spoke anyway. Divorce, usually within a year or two of the inheritance being settled. She takes half of everything in the settlement, then disappears. Sometimes she accuses them of abuse to strengthen her legal position. Sometimes she just vanishes one day, leaving them broken. My son. My sweet, trusting boy who I'd raised to see the best in people, to give second chances, to believe in love and commitment. She was going to destroy him just as thoroughly as she'd destroyed me, and he would never see it coming. We have to stop her, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. We will, Peter assured me. But we need to be smart about it. If we move too fast, she'll disappear before we can build a legal case. If we move too slow, she'll complete whatever she's planning next. What is she planning next? Peter pulled out a manila folder and opened it to reveal what looked like legal documents. We've been monitoring her activities since your husband first contacted me. 3 days ago, she made an appointment with an elder law attorney. Yesterday, she had a consultation with a real estate agent about getting a market evaluation for your house. The room seemed to tilt around me. She wants to sell my house? She's laying the groundwork to have Ethan declared your financial guardian, citing your emotional instability and poor judgment following your husband's death. The car incident will be presented as evidence that you're no longer competent to manage your own affairs. I felt sick. She was going to use my grief against me, twist my love for James's memory into proof of mental incompetence. She was going to convince my own son to take away my independence, my dignity, my right to make decisions about my own life. How long do we have? Not long. I'd guess she's planning to move within the next 2 weeks. Elder law cases can move quickly when there's an alleged urgent need to protect someone's assets. 2 weeks. 14 days to gather evidence, build a case, and save not just my own life but my son's future. 2 weeks to expose a woman who'd spent years perfecting her predatory skills. What do we do first? Peter smiled grimly. We go to the bank. Your husband left you more than just money in that safe deposit box, he left you power. And we're going to use every bit of it. The drive to First National Bank felt like traveling through a minefield. Every car behind us could be Sophie following us. Every phone call could be her making her next move. Peter had warned me that once we opened that safe deposit box, there would be no going back. Sophie would eventually realize that James had outmaneuvered her, and she would become dangerous in ways I couldn't yet imagine. But I was already living dangerously. Every day I spent in ignorance was another day she had to perfect her plan, to manipulate Ethan further, to position herself for the final devastating blow that would destroy everything James and I had built together. The bank manager, Mrs. Richardson, had known James for 20 years. When I presented the key and the proper identification, her professional demeanor softened with genuine sympathy. I'm so sorry for your loss, Margaret. Your husband was such a lovely man. He set this box up about 2 years ago and was very specific about the access instructions. The safe deposit box was larger than I'd expected, and when Mrs. Richardson opened it, I gasped at the contents. Stock certificates, as James had promised, but also USB drives, photograph files, audio recordings, and what looked like surveillance reports. Your husband was thorough, Peter observed, his voice filled with professional admiration. The stock certificates alone were worth more than the 300,000 James had mentioned in his letter. He'd been quietly building this nest egg for years, probably since his first suspicious encounter with Sophie. But the real treasure was the evidence. USB drives containing recorded phone conversations between Sophie and unknown parties, discussing the Lanning situation and timeline acceleration. Photographs of her meeting with the real estate agent, the elder law attorney, and most damning of all, a man I didn't recognize who Peter immediately identified as Marcus Webb, a known associate who specialized in forged documents and identity fraud. She's not working alone, Peter explained as we drove back to my house. She never has been. Marcus provides the false identities and documentation. There's probably a whole network of people who help her identify targets, gather information, and clean up loose ends. Loose ends? Witnesses who might ask inconvenient questions. Family members who don't cooperate with the program. People like you, Margaret. The chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the weather. Are you saying I'm in physical danger? I'm saying we need to be very careful how we proceed. Sophie's previous fathers-in-law didn't die of natural causes, and you're the only person standing between her and a very large payday. We spent the rest of that day and most of the next planning our strategy. Peter had contacts in law enforcement who specialized in elder fraud, prosecutors who'd been tracking Sophie's network for years without being able to build a solid case. My evidence could be the key to finally stopping her, but only if we could present it properly and protect ourselves in the process. The hardest part was deciding what to do about Ethan. Peter wanted to bring him in immediately, to show him the evidence and get him on our side. But I knew my son better than that. Ethan was proud, stubborn, and deeply loyal to the people he loved. If we confronted him with proof that his wife was a criminal, his first instinct would be to defend her, to rationalize away the evidence, to convince himself that we were the ones who were mistaken. He needs to discover the truth himself, I insisted. If we just dump all this on him, he'll think we're trying to sabotage his marriage out of jealousy or spite. That's a dangerous game, Margaret. The longer we wait, the more time Sophie has to poison him against you. She's already done that, I said bitterly. Did you see how he looked at me when he told me to get over losing the car? That wasn't my son talking, that was her, speaking through him. But even as I said it, I knew I had to try to reach him. I had to believe that somewhere underneath Sophie's manipulation, the boy I'd raised was still there, still capable of seeing the truth if it was presented the right way. I called him that evening, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. Hello, Mom. His voice was cold, distant, nothing like the warm, affectionate tone he'd used with me for 25 years. Ethan, I need to talk to you. Can you come over? If this is about the car again? It's not about the car. That was true, technically. It was about so much more than the car. Please, honey. Just give me an hour. There was a long pause, and I could hear Sophie's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Finally, Ethan sighed. Fine. But I can't stay long. Sophie and I have dinner plans. Of course they did. Sophie wouldn't want him spending too much time alone with me, wouldn't want to risk him hearing something that might crack the spell she'd woven around him. He arrived an hour later, and I was shocked by how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he'd lost weight. He looked like a man under tremendous stress, though he was trying hard to hide it. You look exhausted, I said, ushering him into the living room. Work's been crazy, he said, settling into his father's old chair without seeming to realize what he'd done. Sophie thinks we should take a longer vacation when things calm down. Maybe a month in Europe. A month in Europe. On what money? Ethan was a middle manager at a local manufacturing company, good, steady work, but hardly the kind of income that supported month-long European vacations. Unless, of course, they were planning to finance it with money from selling my assets. That sounds expensive, I said carefully. Sophie's good with money. She's been helping me restructure my investments, looking at ways to maximize our returns. He paused, then looked at me with something that might have been concern. Actually, Mom, she's been worried about you too. She thinks you might benefit from some financial planning help. And there it was. The setup. Sophie had been planting seeds, making Ethan believe that I was financially irresponsible, that I needed his guidance and oversight. She was positioning herself as the voice of reason, the practical one who could help both of us make better decisions. What kind of help? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Well, this house is really too big for one person. And some of your investments. Dad wasn't exactly a financial expert, you know? Sophie thinks there might be better ways to structure things, ways that would give you more security and peace of mind. I see. I was quiet for a moment, letting him talk, letting Sophie's agenda reveal itself through his words. And what does Sophie think I should do? Maybe look at some of those nice senior communities. You'd have less to worry about, more social interaction. And we could help you manage your portfolio more actively, make sure you're getting the best returns. Every word was like a knife in my heart. This wasn't my son talking, this was Sophie's script, delivered by someone who had no idea he was being used. She'd convinced him that she was looking out for my best interests, that her suggestions were motivated by love and concern rather than greed and calculation. Ethan, I said gently, do you remember when you were 16, and you wanted to buy that motorcycle? He looked confused by the apparent change of subject. Yeah, why? Your father and I said no, remember? We thought it was too dangerous. And you were so angry with us. You said we didn't trust you, that we were trying to control your life. I remember. But I understand now why you were worried. Do you? Or do you just understand now that we were right about the motorcycle being dangerous? What's the difference? The difference is whether you trust our judgment because you love us, or whether you only accept our decisions when they turn out to be correct. I leaned forward, holding his gaze. Son, I need you to trust my judgment now, even if you don't understand it yet. Something flickered in his eyes, some echo of the boy who used to come to me with his problems, who used to value my opinion above anyone else's. But then it was gone, replaced by the polite distance Sophie had taught him. Mom, if this is about Sophie. This is about you, I interrupted. This is about the man I raised, the man who used to believe that family loyalty meant protecting each other, not selling each other's most precious possessions for vacation money. His face flushed with anger. We've been through this. I'm sorry about the car, okay? But you're not being rational about this. It was just a car. It was never just a car, and you know it. I stood up, pacing to the window where I could see James's empty garage. That car was your father's heart, Ethan. It was 37 years of Saturday mornings and shared dreams. It was our promise to each other to grow old together, to take those road trips we always talked about. But Dad's gone, Mom. Those dreams are gone. You can't live in the past forever. I'm not living in the past. I'm honoring it. There's a difference. I turned back to face him, and I saw something in his expression that gave me hope, uncertainty, conflict, the first crack in Sophie's carefully constructed facade. Ethan, I want you to ask yourself something. When did you stop believing that some things are more important than money? When did you start thinking that love could be measured in dollars and cents? That's not fair. When did you stop being the man who once told me that integrity was worth more than any amount of money? I pressed on, remembering a conversation we'd had when he was in college, struggling with whether to report a friend for cheating. You said that character was the only thing no one could take away from you. Do you remember that? For a moment, just a moment, I saw my real son looking back at me. Confused, conflicted, but present in a way he hadn't been in months. Then his phone buzzed with a text message, and I watched him check it automatically. The change was immediate. His face closed off again, the momentary connection severed as effectively as if someone had thrown a switch. I have to go, he said, standing abruptly. Sophie's waiting. Ethan, please. Mom, I know you miss Dad. I know this has been hard for you. But you can't expect the whole world to stop because you're grieving. Some of us are trying to build a future. He left without saying goodbye, and I stood at the window watching his car disappear down the street. In the reflection of the glass, I could see James's empty chair behind me, and for a moment I felt the crushing weight of fighting this battle alone. But I wasn't alone. James had made sure of that. He'd given me allies, evidence, and resources. Most importantly, he'd given me the truth, and the truth was a weapon Sophie couldn't defend against forever. Peter called that evening with disturbing news. She's accelerating her timeline. Our contact at the elder law firm says she moved her appointment up to tomorrow. And there's more, Marcus Webb was spotted at the county recorder's office this afternoon. What does that mean? It means she's not waiting for legal guardianship. She's planning to forge documents, make it look like you've already signed over power of attorney. Once those papers are filed, she can start liquidating your assets immediately. The audacity of it took my breath away. She wasn't just planning to manipulate the system, she was planning to completely circumvent it, to steal my life's work through outright fraud. Can we stop her? We can try. But Margaret, once she files those papers, even proving they're forged will take time. Time you might not have if she decides you're too much of a threat to leave alive. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump, every shadow outside my window could have been Sophie or one of her associates. I kept James's baseball bat next to my bed and triple-checked all the locks, but I knew that if Sophie had decided I was too dangerous to live, a baseball bat and some deadbolts weren't going to save me. The next morning, Peter arrived early with a plan that was either brilliant or insane, depending on your perspective. We're going to let her file the papers, he said. Are you out of your mind? Think about it, Margaret. Right now, everything she's done could be explained away as miscommunication or overzealous concern for your welfare. But forging legal documents? That's a federal crime with serious jail time. If we can catch her in the act, document the fraud as it happens, we'll have her dead to rights. And if something goes wrong? If she succeeds in stealing everything before we can stop her? Then we'll have irrefutable proof of criminal intent, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit will freeze every asset she tries to touch. Peter's expression was grim but determined. It's risky, but it's our best shot at not just stopping her, but putting her away for good. I thought about all the other families she'd destroyed, all the other fathers who'd died alone and forgotten while she counted their money. I thought about the sons she'd manipulated and abandoned, left broken and confused in the wreckage of their own lives. What do you need me to do? Stay visible. Go about your normal routine, but make sure people see you acting competent and alert. We need witnesses who can testify that you were clearly of sound mind when these documents were allegedly signed. I spent that morning at the grocery store, the bank, and the post office, making sure to have conversations with people who knew me, who could attest to my mental state. It felt surreal, like I was creating an alibi for my own sanity. But as the day wore on, I found myself getting angry again. Not the helpless rage I'd felt when I discovered the missing car, but a cold, focused fury that gave me strength. Sophie thought she was dealing with a confused old woman who could be easily discarded. She thought she'd isolated me from my support system, convinced my son to turn against me, positioned herself to take everything I'd worked for without consequence. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The call came at 3:47 p.m. Peter's voice was tight with excitement and urgency. She did it. She filed the documents 20 minutes ago. And Margaret? We got everything on video. What happens now? Now we spring the trap. But first, we need to get your son to safety. Because when this comes down, Sophie's going to realize that her only way out is to eliminate anyone who can testify against her. Ethan won't listen to me. He will now. Because 20 minutes ago, Sophie also filed for divorce and a restraining order against him, claiming he's been emotionally abusive and she fears for her safety. The bottom dropped out of my world. What? It's part of her exit strategy. She's positioning herself as the victim, setting up legal protection while she drains your accounts and disappears. By tomorrow morning, she'll have access to everything you own, and your son will be facing criminal charges for domestic abuse. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of Sophie's evil settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. She wasn't just stealing money, she was destroying lives with surgical precision, leaving behind ruins that would take years to rebuild. Where is Ethan now? According to our surveillance, he's at work. He doesn't know about the divorce papers yet, they'll be served tomorrow morning. We need to reach him first. I was already reaching for my car keys. I'm going to get him. Margaret, be careful. Sophie's dangerous, and she's running out of options. Desperate people do desperate things. As I drove to Ethan's workplace, my phone rang. It was Tom from the dealership. Margaret, I thought you should know, someone broke into my shop last night. They didn't take anything, but they went straight to your husband's car. Looked like they were searching for something. Of course. Sophie had realized that James might have left evidence, and she was trying to eliminate anything that could incriminate her. But she was too late, we already had everything we needed. I found Ethan in the parking lot of his office building, sitting in his car with his head in his hands. When I knocked on his window, he looked up with red, swollen eyes. Mom? He rolled down the window, confusion clear in his voice. What are you doing here? I came to take you home, son. I can't go home. Sophie, she's... He couldn't finish the sentence, just gestured helplessly. She's gone, isn't she? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I came home for lunch, and the house was empty. All her things are gone. Her clothes, her jewelry, even the pictures we had together. It's like she was never there. Ethan, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're in danger, and we don't have much time. What are you talking about? I got into the passenger seat and pulled out the folder Peter had prepared, copies of the evidence James had gathered, documentation of Sophie's previous crimes, and most importantly, the forged power of attorney papers she'd filed that morning. Your wife isn't who you think she is, I said gently. Her real name is Sandra Mitchell, and she's a professional con artist. She's been planning to steal everything we own from the moment she met you. Ethan stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. This is impossible. Sophie loves me. We're planning a future together. Look at the dates, son. Look at the pattern. I showed him the timeline Peter had constructed, the marriages and deaths and divorces stretching back nearly a decade. She's done this before. Multiple times. But she filed for divorce. Why would she do that if she was trying to steal from us? Because it's part of her plan. She's positioning herself as the victim while she drains our accounts and disappears. Tomorrow morning, you're going to be served with papers claiming you abused her, and by tomorrow afternoon, she'll have legal access to everything I own. I watched his face as the truth sank in, watched years of manipulation and lies crumble under the weight of evidence. It was like watching someone wake up from a nightmare, only to discover that the nightmare was real and the waking world was even worse. The car, he whispered. Oh God, Mom, the car. She made me, she said. He broke down completely, sobbing with the kind of grief that comes from losing not just a person, but your faith in your own judgment. I held him while he cried, this man I'd raised, this son I'd loved through every stage of his life. He felt fragile in my arms, broken by the realization that everything he'd believed about his marriage, his wife, his future, had been a carefully constructed lie. We're going to stop her, I promised. Your father made sure we could stop her. Dad knew? He suspected. He spent the last year of his life investigating her, gathering evidence, preparing for this moment. I pulled out James's letter and handed it to Ethan. He wanted to protect both of us. Ethan read the letter in silence, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't name. When he finished, he looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the 9-year-old boy I'd first brought home, lost and scared and desperate for someone to tell him everything would be okay. How could I have been so stupid? He asked. You weren't stupid. You were in love. She's very good at what she does, she's had years of practice manipulating men exactly like you. What does really matter? This, he said, gesturing around the garage. Family. Honesty. Taking care of each other. Building something that lasts. He paused, running his hand along the Shelby's fender. Dad built this car, but more than that, he built a family. He built a legacy of love and integrity that Sophie couldn't touch, no matter how hard she tried. She came pretty close. But she didn't succeed. And you know why? Because what Dad built was stronger than what she could tear down. The love in this family, the values he taught us, the foundation he laid, none of that was ever really in danger. I felt tears starting again, but these were different from the angry, helpless tears I'd cried in this garage weeks ago. These were tears of relief, of recognition, of gratitude for the gift James had given us, not just the evidence that had saved us from Sophie, but the deeper gift of knowing how to love each other well. I miss him so much, I whispered. I know. I miss him too. But Mom, he's not really gone. He's in every lesson he taught us, every value he instilled, every moment of love we shared. Sophie tried to make us forget that, tried to convince us that only money mattered, that sentiment was weakness. But she was wrong. The car. The car is beautiful, and I'm glad we got it back. But it was never really about the car, was it? It was about what the car represented. Dad's love, his dreams, his promise that some things are too precious to price. I looked around the garage, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't a shrine to the past anymore, it was a workshop for the future. A place where Ethan and I could build new memories while honoring the old ones. A place where James's love could continue to grow and spread, even though he was gone. What happens now? I asked. Now we live, Ethan said simply. We take care of each other, we work on the car, we figure out what our new normal looks like. Maybe we even take that road trip Dad always talked about. You'd want to do that? I think we both need it. A chance to see the country, to experience some of the adventures Dad dreamed about. A chance to prove that his dreams don't have to die with him. 6 months later, we did exactly that. Ethan had found a new job that allowed him to work remotely, and I had discovered that retirement didn't have to mean isolation. We planned a 3-week road trip that would take us through the Southwest, hitting all the classic car shows and scenic routes that James had marked in his old road atlases. The night before we left, I stood in the garage running my hands over the Shelby's perfect paint job, thinking about all the Saturday mornings James had spent preparing for this moment. He'd never gotten to take this trip, never gotten to see the Grand Canyon reflected in the car's chrome bumpers or feel the desert wind rushing through the open windows. But in a way, he would be with us. His love had built this car, his wisdom had saved our family, his legacy would travel every mile with us. Sophie had tried to reduce our lives to dollar signs and balance sheets, but she'd failed to understand the most important truth of all. Love never ends. It just finds new ways to grow. My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old, and the morning I found my late husband's garage empty, I thought my heart stopped beating. But I was wrong. My heart didn't stop, it just learned to beat with a different rhythm, one that included loss and betrayal and the discovery that even in the darkest moments, love finds a way to fight back. The Shelby is home now, where it belongs. Ethan is healing, slowly but surely. Sophie is in prison, where she can't hurt any more families. And I am learning that widow doesn't have to mean victim, that 68 doesn't have to mean powerless, that the end of one story can be the beginning of another. Would you have forgiven your child for something that precious? I hope you never have to find out. But if you do, I hope you'll remember that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing. It's about choosing love over revenge, hope over bitterness, healing over hatred. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, forgiveness leads to something even more precious than what you lost, the chance to build something new together, something stronger than what came before, something that can't be stolen or sold or reduced to cash. Subscribe if this story touched you. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. And remember, love never ends. It just transforms, adapts, endures. Sometimes it even wins.